Welcome to KIRKS Toolbox. Today's webinar topic, air disc brakes, preventative maintenance for calipers, select pads, and rotors. Our panelists today are Bob Kirkman. He is the co-president of KIRKS and has been in the transit parts industry for over 25 years. Our special guest today is Rob Alvarado. He is the technical sales manager of North America Celerity Systems. Rob is one of the favorites at KIRKS with the account managers. The account managers want to have a sound grasp of all the parts and products you'll be dealing with. And Rob's training, he comes in, trains them. He's an industry expert with a lot of experience in the heavy-duty brake systems. So his training is exceptional, and we're really thrilled to have Rob today. You're going to really enjoy this. I am Linda Kleist, your webinar host. We have Abby Thompson on technical. So if you have any technical issues, please let us know in the chat. And we want to answer your questions. So Rob will stop. If you've got a question on something he's demonstrating, just type that into the Q&A and we can let Rob know that a question has come in. Rob's going to discuss the 3 critical topics that are relevant to your industry: copper-free pad formulations, preventative maintenance techniques with a demonstration on OE-authorized brake pad change, and testing procedures. So with no further ado, Rob, please take it away.
Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Rob, and I am an authorized air disc brake trainer for KIRKS Transit Fleet Equipment. Let's get started. Air disc brake is the topic. Let's get started. The agenda today. I'm going to talk briefly about some of the changes that have happened in heavy-duty braking and as it pertains to air disc brake. We're going to talk about the advantages of air disc brake on heavy-duty vehicles, whether they're buses or tractor trailers. We're going to talk about the common parts of the air disc brake system. We're also going to talk about the differences between the transit air disc brake systems that are out there. We're going to do by video, we're going to do a brake change on an ADB22X air disc brake. It is the baby brother of the SN7. So just to save time, I only chose one caliper instead of doing both of them. But we're also going to talk features and benefits very quickly. A couple of slides on select air pads and air disc pads and rotors. Questions. As Linda said, please stop us if I'm going too fast. If you didn't catch anything or you want me to explain, type it and they can stop me. Probably they can stop me and we can address it, or we can address it all the way at the end. So what's changed? Foundation brake has been around since the beginning of the wheel almost. It's sound technology. The one thing that air disc brake does better is with eliminating brake fade, which we'll talk about here in a minute. But the biggest thing that happened on the over-the-road side, and possibly the transit, but for sure over the road, is they changed the stopping distance from 355 feet to 250 feet. That pertains to a Class 8 tractor trailer fully loaded going 60 miles an hour, had to stop before 2011, 355, after 2011, 250 feet. So that's about a third less space. And that is one of the things that help air disc brake kind of become very, very popular. The caliper you see right there in front of you is the ADB22X. It is an over-the-road. There are some charter buses that have its cousin, the SK, out there, and I think there's some out there with this one, but it's actually too small to do a giant charter bus or transit bus. You need something in the SN7 range or EX225 range, where you have a 10-inch brake pad versus about an 8.5. So Bendix came out with that in 2005, 6 years before the change, and they are the leader. Right now, currently, Bendix has more than 4 million units, and this is back in April of 21, and Knorr-Bremse has 45 million units globally. So Knorr-Bremse owns Bendix CVS. I typically only talk about Bendix because that's the United States version of Knorr-Bremse, but it is the SN7 is an actual Knorr-Bremse caliper versus that one that you see right there, which is an American caliper. It is the cousin of the SK7 in Europe, but that caliper right there is the Bendix ADB22X. Each of the 4 manufacturers have an aftermarket program, and the reason I talk about that is I know that they are looking for sales, and making sure that they have enough sales. If you look at foundation brake, each and every year in the parts business, we see a decrease in shoes and drums. And the reason is more and more vehicles are going air disc. So in thinking about that, my take is that all of the four manufacturers have all makes, all models, because they are trying to continue selling parts, and they need air disc brake from every one of the major manufacturers in order to continue to compete. Moving on, why air disc over drum brakes? These are the 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. These are the 7 reasons that I have found. So on the left is the reason, on the right is the actual benefit to any fleet: better performance, better efficiency. The 3 in green are the ones that I really talk about in detail in the full class: reduced brake fade, safer stops in emergency situations, or multiple situations, or multiple braking. You have a little bit of hills, or possibly, I don't know who I'm talking to, so you might have mountains next to you. You're coming down the mountain fully loaded. These have the least amount of brake fade that has ever been on a transit bus, a tractor, a trailer. So again, very, very important. Easier maintenance. To change the brake pads, it's about 60 to 75% less time than changing shoes, shoes on foundation brake. Once you've changed them, has longer intervals in between changing the pads again or changing linings again versus foundation brake. So those are the main reasons that I have found. And depending where you're at, the bottom one, calipers are enclosed. Depending on the fleet and who's listening at this moment in time, I don't think transit has the DOT police inspecting them, but over the road, this is a definite thing. Or out of stroke issues. The DOT police actually know what the stroke is on a certain brake chamber. Will measure it on these systems that you'll see here in a second. You can't measure the stroke because they're enclosed. The brake chamber sits right on top of the caliper, and you can't see the movement. So let's talk about, now that I have this picture up, let's talk about the differences between the calipers. And I'm talking about just the transit ones. So it's going to be the Knorr-Bremse SB SN7, S being the older one, SN being the newer one, and then the Meritor EX225 H2 and H3. The Knorr-Bremse, of course, the biggest reason is there's 2 different manufacturers. But if you looked at how they operate and the internal components, you would see a difference between the 2. The Knorr-Bremse has 35 total pieces. 23 pieces of them are internal. You're probably not going to mess with any of them except for maybe the tappet boots and the inner seals inside of the tappet boots. Those 4 pieces with the crush washers are probably the only thing that you would tackle. Possibly the guide pins, which there's 12 pieces on the guide pins, making up a total of 35. Pretty easy system to understand and to work on. But when you get to the EX225, it is definitely more intricate and, to me, stronger because there's not a chain involved. But if you look at this, there's 47 pieces on a Meritor EX225 H2, H3. Either one of the 2, there's 26 internal pieces and 21 guide pins. So on this piece, you would probably be looking at maintaining or inspecting and replacing the guide pins. And if you're the bushings, the boots, and if you're there, why not do the bushings? So this whole kit on the right, minus the top right-hand number 12, would all be pieces that you would be replacing and or maintaining. On the left side of the picture, number 7 would be the boots. Those are pretty easy to do, and they just kind of go on top of, and you can change those pretty easy without any specialty tools. But those are the big differences between them, other than the manufacturer. When you do a brake job, they both take a 10 millimeter. Ratcheting box end would be the best. You could use a 1/4 inch, but pretty easy to do. So now let's take a look at a caliper, and this one is a Bendix ADB 22X L version, which for a trade, but it's just for an example. I didn't have a better picture to use. So let's talk about the common parts of pretty much any air disc brake system. And they are caliper. When I say caliper, I'm actually talking about both pieces. The top half is the caliper body. The bottom half is the carrier. The carrier does just that. It carries and suspends the brake pads up in the air by means of 4-letter L's, and it puts it at the right position next to the rotor. It also suspends the caliper body by means of 2 guide pins. If you've ever done brakes on your own personal vehicle, this is the exact same system, which is a floating caliper system, and it's exact same technology that you would have had on your personal vehicles. So it is from light duty. And the reason why is that it works. Brake pads, every single caliper has 2 brake pads in there. And on top of the brake pads are 2 tension springs. These tension springs do just that. They provide tension by means of the pad retaining bar. Okay. When you install them, there's going to be pressure going down. They put pressure on the brake pads so that as you're driving down your city streets or your highways, they don't sit there and clank and make noise hitting the caliper, the rotor, the whatever, and it keeps them in place. When you apply the brake, it keeps them kind of seated so that they don't go and try to go with the rotor and hit the carrier and sit there and vibrate. Vibration at that rate of speed, we would hear it as brake squeal. So it is important to have those on there. And every time you change brake pads, every single manufacturer says to replace those, and it's there for a reason. Each manufacturer has a different way that they attach the top bar. They look different and they attach different. In this instance, on the Norbremse/Bendix, it's a clevis pin with a washer and a cotter pin. On the Meritor, it's a regular bolt. It's a metric bolt, but it's just a bolt. And then Wabco and some of the other ones have regular bolts and other things. But this is just the common parts of a system. Rotor, everybody knows what it does. It's your interface, and it's also the surface where the brake pads ride next to. When you apply the brake, that's what it grabs. It grabs the rotor and stops the rotation of the axle, because what is attached to the axle is a hub, and the rotor is attached to the hub by one means or the other. It stops moving, which stops the hub, which has the wheel on it, and stops the rotation of that, stops the momentum of the vehicle. Brake chamber, we'll talk about that more here in depth, but they're bolted onto the very top of the brake chamber, the brake caliper. We'll talk about the different styles that are out there right now. Last but not least, tappets and boots. You cannot really see them, but they're on the inside, on the brake chamber side. So I have this slide. This slide just demonstrates the 2 different types of calipers that are out there: a dual piston or tappet, and then a single tappet or adjuster mechanism on the right. I say piston because everybody acknowledges and thinks of it as a piston, but in all actuality, up on the upper right left-hand corner, it's not really a piston. It's truly a mechanical device that screws out of a bridge assembly or some sort of assembly, and it screws out. And when we as technicians need to do a brake job, we mechanically pull them back in, and they rotate back into the body, and it gives us enough space to put new brake pads in. But it's truly a mechanical device after the brake chamber. Below the 2 pictures are the companies that use 2 versus 1. But in all of the 4 companies, or possibly even 6 companies, if everything goes well for those other 2 companies, the weakest part of all calipers are the rubber boots. So once these boots get torn is when contamination will get into the 2 different systems. The guide pins is separate from the adjuster mechanisms, but they all have rubber boots on them. If they get compromised, that's where you'll have some issues. So we definitely need to inspect them at every single brake job, and possibly at every PM. It's a pain in the butt because you have to take off the brake pads in order to see them. But for sure, at every single brake job, you definitely need to inspect the boots. Brake chambers, we talked about brake chambers and the fact that they're bolted directly to the top, but if you took a look at a brake chamber, a parking brake chamber, which is on the right, and sliced it in half, it would look just like the slicing of a 30-30, which is the middle of the screen right now. The difference is the push rod. From the push rod down, it eliminates all of that because that is a slack adjuster, and the slack adjuster, for all intents and purposes, we can call it a slack adjuster. The adjuster mechanism is inside of the calipers on all of the companies. It's not external anymore. It's inside. So if you were to take a look at this brake chamber on the right, it would look exactly like that. There are service and or parking brake for air disc, and they're bolted right to the top. By the way, trick question, and nobody can answer, but how many springs are inside of a parking brake chamber? And the answer is 3. Everybody knows about the one giant spring that's housed in the farthest part where you have to cage it, but there's actually 2 return springs inside of there, and it's kind of shown in the middle of the page. And that just helps push that diaphragm back so that when you're done either applying the foot valve or the brake pedal, it helps push that diaphragm back, pushing the push rod back and releasing the brake pads. Same with the spring brake. Once you've released the, put pressure into the one side, it also helps push that spring back as well. But there's 3 springs inside of a parking brake chamber. Wear indicators. There's a multitude of wear indicators, depending if you have an SB or SN7. There's a few different styles that are out there. The most common right now for an SN7 is the 2 halves of the caliper. And you could see the blue lines, the lighter blue lines coming in. Those are cast onto the caliper on purpose, so that when you put a new set of brake pads in there, it'll have the width of 1 brake pad, which is about 20 millimeters, 22 millimeters. When those brake pads are wearing out, the 2 halves of the caliper will come together. And when those lines line up, it's time to service that caliper and probably change the brakes on that. Just know that it is a combination of the 2 brakes. So if there's any guide pin issues and you're sticking and the inside is wearing more than the outside or vice versa, it's the difference between the 2 or the combination between the 2. So you could actually go in there at this moment on that picture and find that one side is worn out and the other one is pretty much fully, has full material on it. So just know that it's just a guide. In order to get proper wear indicator, you have to pull a wheel and look down and inspect the brake pads. But that's the most common right now. Some older styles are on the one guide pin, it'll have a rubber boot on it, a rubber bushing they call it. And on the one on the left, you can see that the letter C indicates how much life is left on the brake pads. As that pushes in, it's going to take the stem with it, and it makes it looks like the bottom one looks like a little Reese cup that's upside down, peanut butter cup. But there's probably going to be about 1 millimeter, and that's your indication to change or look at that braking system and change the pads. On the right would be an open bearing, so there's no rubber boot on it, and the distance at full would be 20 millimeters or the equivalent of it. And then as that wears away, C on the bottom would be 1 millimeter. And that's when you need to change it. 2 other styles, depending on the age of the caliper, is a short rubber sleeve and a long rubber sleeve. Short rubber sleeve, pretty much the same as the last one. It has about 20 millimeters. As it wears, it's going to pull itself in. When there's just about 1 millimeter left, you need to service that caliper. On the right, the sleeve comes over the guide pin, and as it goes in, it goes internal, and when there's 18 millimeters is your maximum. If it's 18 or more, you definitely need to service that caliper. So that is just a visual. Now they have, depending on your fleet, depending when you spec them, they have a mechanical, electronic mechanical. The one on the left would go right onto the brake pad, and as the rotor wears the brake pad away or vice versa, when the material is gone, that little square block wears away, and there's a wire inside of there that connects your B negative side of a circuit, and the light turns on the dashboard. So that just indicates that there's about 4 millimeters left, giving you some time to get to the shop and repair or fix, at least look at that system and probably put new pads in there. The newer technology, or the newest technology, has a potentiometer that is on, like on this one, it's on the other side of the adjuster mechanism. So where you put the 10 millimeter ratchet, it's on the other side on that plastic housing. And that attaches to the driver, and it measures the rotations of slack adjustment. So as it's taking out the slack, it adjusts it in, and it measures how many rotations. And it used to tell you on the dashboard by means of a gauge, full brakes, 3/4, half, all the way down to changing the brakes. Now, the newest technology is using that and then connecting that to a computer that is hooked up wirelessly, and you can actually send data off to a different entity like your home office, and then they can kind of keep track of how much life is left and pretty much send a memo saying, hey, transit bus this number, these are coming due, you need to schedule time in. But that's the newest technology. On Meritor, they have a very simple design at this moment in time. I have not read where they have electronics as of yet, but I'm sure they're coming. And it is the EX225, H2, H3. They have a stick, just a simple stick that rides inside of that cast iron with the spring behind it. And as the two halves come together and the brake pads are wearing out, it pushes that stem out. And on the stem, it tells you as a percentage how much life is left on the brake pads. Very ingenious, very simple, and it definitely works. So, brake job. As I said before, we're going to do a brake job by video, and we're going to do it on a ADB22X. Hey, Bob, can you hear me? I'm just trying to make sure that the video is coming. Can you see the video? Okay.
Yes, sir.
I'm just making sure. So this is on an ADB22X. I'm in my garage. You do not need specialty tools, a scraper of some sort, pair of pliers. You're going to need possibly a prying device, which is a screwdriver, a hammer, just in case you don't want to use your pliers as a hammer, a nylon brush, a shop towel. You'll need a flashlight, a 10 millimeter box. Ratcheting is easiest, but you could use a spanner. You could use a 1/4 inch ratchet. But anyhow, to start this off on this Knorr-Bremse or Bendix, you pull the cotter pin, pull the washer, pull it out, get your hammer or pliers. I usually use pliers because it's not that hard. But as the corrosion builds, you're going to need a hammer. Take your pliers, pull it out. Make sure to put some pressure on top because it is going to want to flip up. Take it out. Now, right here, according to the manuals now, they are asking you to back the tappets off just a hair, maybe 3 or 4 clicks, okay? And you're getting some extra clearance so that you could do what I just did. Me personally, and what I have seen is that if it doesn't have any problems and it's coming in for routine brake job, you can just take them out just like I did. It should have between 0.6 to 1.1 millimeters of clearance, and you should be able to do just that. So take out the brake pads right now, and I just threw them to the side. Right now is when you would take the brake pads and inspect them. You would take the brake pads and you inspect the face of them, and I'm going to use my cell phone. You would look at the brake pads and look to see if you have any cracking, edges, the actual material itself. You take the 2 brake pads and put them next to each other and try to eyeball to see how thick they are. If you can see a variance between the inside and outside or vice versa, now you need to pull out a micrometer and measure. You cannot be more than 3.5 millimeters between the inside and outside on the Knorr-Bremse. If they are, you need to start thinking about servicing that caliper. But brake pad itself, you need to measure, eyeball it, and actually you don't need to measure. If you can see that it is perfectly, I can't, there we go, perfectly perpendicular to the backing plate, you're fine. If you can see with your naked eye that it is pitched and wearing at an angle, you definitely need to take out your micrometer and measure from the bottom to the top on this side. Then you flip it around and do the bottom to the top on this side. Between those two numbers, from the bottom to the top, it cannot vary more than 2 millimeters. If it does, those bushings, you need to inspect the caliper. And what you're going to find is that those bushings on that caliper are worn and you need to replace it or service the caliper. So we'll get to that here in a minute. So at this moment in time, we pulled the brake pads. Now, the very first thing you need to do is to inspect these tappet boots. And all you need to do is put a flashlight to it, use your fingers and push it, manipulate it. And you're looking for cracks, tears, any sort of opening, okay? Go around, go underneath, get your mirror because you're not going to be able to see real good. Use your fingers as kind of guide in your cleaning. And you need to make sure that those tappet boots are intact. Now's the time. And if they're good, the last thing you're going to do, and I just did if anybody remembers the Fonz, but I took my two fingers, my thumbs, and I'm putting them on the tappet heads. And you would do this on the Meritor as well, but you're just trying to make sure that they move slightly. If you continue to move that with your thumb, like I do on the right-hand side, watch the boot. It's going to wrap up on itself. So that just means that it's tightened onto the tappet head. It's one unit because they've tightened it onto it, and it's still, perfect. There's no cracks, there's no tears. It's still good. But don't do that. You don't need to do it. Just make sure that it moves slightly, and then you're good. Now we're going to pull this back. And to do that, you take off the domed rubber cap. You take the shear adapter, and you're going to, as it pertains to the rotor, the tappet heads are going to tighten onto the rotor. No, we're going to loosen away from the rotor. So we're going to go righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. We're going to go ahead and go left. Now, I say that saying, and I say it, and it's corny, I get it, but it still is one of the things that I teach in my technician classes, because the one of the most common reasons that we break that little shear adapter is because we're trying to go one direction and we're already at the opposite direction, and we bottom out because we did not remember righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. It has to, how it pertains to the rotor. So we do want to go away from it. So that's loosen. I put it on there. We spin it around. So I spin it, make sure I'm going the right direction. We come around. And then if I had sound to this video, you would hear a ratcheting noise, kind of like you're setting your slack adjusters. And that's because you're going the opposite direction on your slacks, same as this. You're pulling them backwards. When you go in, they're silent, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. Now we're going to do a glide test. So with no brake pads in there, you grab the body of the caliper and make sure that it glides freely. So right there, I pointed, but I didn't do much about it. I didn't bring the light. You need to inspect the inside boots as well. So now's the time that you would inspect the guide pin boots to make sure that they're solid as well. If they're not, now's the time that you would need to decide what you're going to do with that caliper, because if you don't and those seize up, they're definitely going to burn up one brake pad or the other. And if it stays stuck, it could actually have a thermal event happen on that wheel end. And for those of you that don't like the jargon, you'll have a fire on your bus at the wheel end. I've seen it happen a couple of different times, and it's not pretty. So definitely make sure that the boots are intact. So now we're going to move on to, what am I doing now? The rotor. So now you would inspect the rotor. You're looking for heat checking, cracks, anything that's out of the norm on the actual face of the caliper. And it's good. It's brand new. It's just rusty from being around. So now we would need to clean the carrier. So just a gentle scraper. I mean, it's a metal scraper, but it's safe. It's not really, really sharp. you clean, scrape the carrier, and then with a nylon brush, you clean out the carrier. Shop air is a forbidden thing, and the reason why is because of the pressure. If you had a separate tank with a separate air compressor and you ran it at 80 psi, you could blow that off real easy. But most folks don't. Most shops don't. They have the single air pressure running through, and that is typically set, I don't know, 125 to 175, and that's too much pressure. And what could happen is you blow a hole into the boots, and you basically made the hole yourself, and you may not even catch it until the next PM. So it is recommended not to use that. Right here, we've inspected everything, we've cleaned everything. The one thing that I did not do, which I'm going to do in a minute. So now we're ready to put brake pads in, I think. Yeah. So at this moment in time, you would open up the bag, the box, the baggie of hardware, and you would go ahead and snap on the brake pads, the tension springs onto the brake pads, and start getting ready to assemble them. They should drop in just like this. And I must have been talking, but I did not mention that on most of all of our rotors, we have a chamfer built into them. And this chamfer, you can see it right in front of the brake lining, is built in to make it 45, 46 millimeters. And as those two chamfers wear out, and when they do wear out, visibly you can see it without pulling out your micrometer that what's left is 37 millimeters. And then you know to change that rotor, okay? So I must have been talking and I didn't see where I was using a screwdriver and showing you that. So we're putting the brake pads in, snapping on the tension springs, putting the brake pads in, and they should slide in just like that. If they do not, pull them back out, take your scraper, go in there, file it down a little bit more, and clean it up, and they should slide in. Now we're gonna get new, fresh hardware, which I'm not doing. If you cannot get the pin to go in just like that, you would use a prying device and get the pin started. On the Meritor, it's pretty easy. You just put down pressure on it, and then of course, just put the screw and get it started. With this, we're gonna go ahead and put a hammer to it. Last thing you're gonna do is to put the eye up, put a washer on it, put a cotter pin, and the one tech tip that I have for you is to put a little dab of silicone right there on the hair clip, the cotter pin right there. And that's only as added protection so that it doesn't fall out and the clevis pin fall out and possibly catastrophic failure. So that is pretty much already assembled. Now we need to adjust. To adjust, we take the same shear adapter with your 10 millimeter, and now you are going to go righty-tighty because you want to tighten onto the rotor. So now it's going to be silent, but you'll see it moving, and you can see the brake pads coming together, and now it's nice and snug. So now you're going to turn it one last time, and you're going to do 3 clicks backwards, and they do make a clicking noise. 1, 2, and 3. 3 clicks. Now you put the shear adapter back in its position. You take the rubber boot that covers it, make sure the tab is facing so you can grab it again, or somebody can grab it again, and you are done. That is an OE-authorized brake change for a Knorr-Bremse. I don't know if I talked about that there is lubrication that should be applied on the brake pads and the carrier, and it's on the letter L, just a very thin layer of grease. And then on the brake pad itself, using my phone as a brake pad, on the upright here, and then the 1 inch right here, before it starts curving up, you put just a thin layer of grease, okay? Then you assemble. Before you put the boot back on the shear adapter, you line it with just a hair of grease, a little bit of grease, and you put it on. And that just helps keep that rubber on there and seal it. So that is a brake change, an OE-authorized brake change. The difference between this and Knorr-Bremse, this and Meritor, is pretty much the procedures are the same. The parts are going to be different. Instead of a clevis, there's a screw. On the clicking, when you make them more snug, you make them snug, and then you're going to go a quarter turn. There isn't the clicking device on there. So you're going to go a quarter turn backwards to give you enough clearance. Okay, that's the biggest thing about the difference between the Meritor and this. Okay, so now we're going to go back and try to continue on with this. Okay, so we talked about the shear adapter, and they're a pain in the butt, aren't they? So Knorr-Bremse has this on the system, and it's for Bendix and Knorr-Bremse. And the reason they have it is to protect that chain that's sitting off to the left. If you use an adapter that goes around it, it's typically on a 3/8 inch ratchet, and you could apply enough pressure to break that chain. If you break that chain, the caliper is no good. Did you need to stop me?
Rob, I just wanted to ask you if you might be sharing your screen for the presentation slide. Can you just reshare to the, click that share again and change your view? Be able to see. Beautiful. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Thank you. Let me do preventative. Okay. Now you can see the broken shear adapter. They're a pain in the butt, but the ultimate goal is to save that chain, and that chain is what synchronizes your two drivers that are inside of the hollow tubes, which are called your tappet heads or your tappets. If you break that chain, you're done. You need to get a new caliper. So be cautious. It's up to you whether you want to use those adapters or not. Me personally, I advise you to continue using those pain in the butt shear adapters just as security. I know we're getting close to the time allotted, but I'm going to try to get to some important points. And they are failures. So on the left would be a regular caliper. You can see that it's very, very dusty. On the right is thermal overload. How do you know that? It leaves a red powder. If you've ever seen this, you'll know it. And what you're going to have to do is open it up, break it apart. You're going to see this red powder everywhere. So with this, you're going to have to decide what you're going to need to do. But I guarantee you're going to, well, the advisable thing is to check the caliper in full detail, check the rotor, and then, of course, change the brake pads. On the left, they got hot. There is a yellow powder that is left, but it's still in the normal stages. Brake pads, you definitely need to take a look at them, and when you're pulling them out, just to see the wear on them. This one on the left, somebody took this, I stole it off the internet, and on the top is a brand new pad, on the bottom is a worn pad, and he sprayed them orange with orange paint, sanded them off just so he could see what the brake pad looked like. And you could see that there's some crumbling on the left-hand side, the right-hand side, and in the middle. To me, that is calcium chloride eating those pads away. So the correction is to inspect everything and then install new pads on it. And the rotor was fine. The boots, you definitely need to take a look at the boot, take a look at the boots and see what's happening with them, especially on the overheated situation. You might find something like in the middle and to the right. Flow charts we're not going to do right now because I want to talk about, sorry for all of the fast moving, running clearance. If you needed to check your running clearance, it should be 0.6 to 1.1. How do you do it? You take the top bar off and you take feeler gauges and you try sticking them in between your tappet heads and the brake pads, both simultaneously. And you should have between 0.6 to 1.1 millimeters. And if you do, your running clearance is fine. There's a way to check your adjuster mechanism. There's a way to check the bearing bushings. And on this one, you definitely need a dial indicator. You attach it, you put a prying device, and your variances are on the slide to the right-hand side of the slide. If it moves more than 3 millimeters, the caliper is definitely trash, or the bearings, the bushings are trash, and you need to put new bushings on there. What you probably will see is probably like on B, and it is the brake pads wearing at an angle. because the caliper is dropping down. Another thing you might see as in a worn caliper refers to C on your page, and it's uneven wear from inboard to outboard or vice versa. Anything more than 3.5 millimeters difference between the inside versus the outside, you definitely need to service that caliper. We're not going to talk about that, but there are kits available out there to do what I'm talking about, preventive maintenance. You do need some specialty tools. So just be aware that these tools are something of the future. They're about $1,800 to $2,000 to buy all those tools just because they're special. You cannot do what we're talking about without those tools. Highlights of the pads I'm not really going to do, but I could tell you that in order to sell in Europe, you have to have an ECE R90 number to sell in the aftermarket. If you don't have that number, you cannot sell legally. So what we bring to North America is the fact that we have an ECE R90 certified brake pad and rotor, and we sell it to you in the aftermarket. Okay, so that's the biggest benefit that I can give you is as to my Select pads and rotors, we have fit, form, and function, but we have a certified matching the OE pad and rotor. And I am right at my stopping point. Sorry that it went so fast. If you need the full class, which is about an hour and a half for technicians, please contact KIRKS and we can arrange something. Questions? Do we have any questions? I know I went really, really fast.
We don't have any questions that have come in. We know that sometimes people don't get their typing fingers going. But do you have general questions that people often ask?
Yeah, typically it's failures. And that's one of the hardest questions. And if you do have a failure, that's the hardest class. And thank you for not bringing it up now. If you do need help with that, that is what I do, is to help fleets with failures. And I analyze the system, look at all of the parts involved, and I help them analyze the failure. So that's one of the biggest questions. Hey, I had this bus and here's what happened. Well, it's very difficult, but what I do is I jump in and I take a look at all the parts. The parts is going to be your telltale signs. And that's where your analysis starts. So if you need help with that, contact KIRKS. For pretty much anything, contact KIRKS and they will get a hold of me and I can help you in that fashion. I know it was very, very fast. I appreciate if you did join. I appreciate your time.
I thought the speed was great, Rob. I feel like I could go in and with your video, watching it again, do an OEM authorized brake chain on a Norb Ramsey. That was great.
Well, don't tell everybody because I make a living doing this. So don't tell everybody about this.
No. I think technician. She thinks she can.
It is pretty easy. It is. That's all I have for you. Bob, do you have anything for the group?
No, Rob, that was a great webinar. Appreciate all the information. And again, like you mentioned, if anyone, is looking for, in-person training for their fleet, definitely give us a call. We can get a hold of one of the KIRKS sales representatives and we can set something up with you. I appreciate it, Rob.
Great information. Thank you, Rob Alvarado with Select, for showing us our all that great information and being our guest today. You've been great. If, as Bob said, you have any questions, you want to quote, give sales@kirks.com an email, shoot them a phone call at 313-933-7030. We will also be emailing this webinar, this recording, to registrants, and it will be available on the YouTube channel later, probably next week. And lastly, KIRKS appreciates your feedback. We'll have a 3-question survey pop up at the end of this webinar. Let us know what you thought about today's presentation. And if there are any topics that would interest you in the future, we want to cover those for you. KIRKS Toolbox is bringing you expert insights. If you're not getting KIRKS monthly news, you can sign up on our website. Just go to the footer, sign up for that monthly news. KIRKS is your partner for parts. Thank you for joining us today.